This video is focused on one of the most dystopian examples of AI-generated ASMR. Slop doesn't even begin to describe whoever first came up with the idea of feeding baby-faced fruits with chunks of their own flesh. The worst part is that loads of people have spotted and copied this trend, so if you've watched one AI glass cutting video, then you run the risk of these grotesque baby fruits popping up on your screen. From a creative perspective, however, this was a completely unique challenge. Unlike jelly fruits or glittery toast, these are significantly harder to replicate using traditional DIY methods. The very first idea I had was to take something fruit-shaped like this pineapple squishy, stick some eyes on it, and add a mouth. Some of these squishies are filled with clay, so I was hoping I could simply create an opening and push some fruit inside. Unfortunately, this one was filled with shaving cream, so it's impossible to cut a hole without making a mess. I also feel this looks too boring, and there's nothing at all here which might trick people into thinking it's AI. The next idea I came up with is to make silicone puppets with movable lips so I can actually feed them pieces of fruit. To do so, I'll need custom molds, which I'm going to sculpt from scratch using polymer clay. I'm using Fimo Kids, which I find is softer and easier to work with. This is quite different to anything I've made before because it has a very expressive, almost vintage-looking face. Apologies for the quality because I was on a tight schedule, so I was filming this late at night at home. I'm starting with a ball of orange clay and rolling it into a mandarin shape. Then I'm creating 2 indents for the eye sockets and cutting out the shape of the mouth. I'm scooping out enough clay to create space to fit real pieces of fruit later on. Then I'm adding a small blob for the nose and smoothing down the edges. I also added extra clay for the cheeks and baked this for 30 minutes at 110 Celsius. For the second one, I'm going to make a kiwi. I'm pressing one side flat against the table and adding the facial features on top. For some reason, this type of face is a lot harder to sculpt than the ones coming out of a 3-dimensional fruit. This is my reference picture, and I think the problem is that I'm trying to make a closed mouth that still needs to be open later on. I wasn't sure how much gap to leave between the lips, and the result doesn't feel open or closed. Even after baking this in the oven, I'm just not feeling it. It somehow reminds me of Bowser's face from Super Mario, and not that I have anything against him, but it just doesn't give me that AI fruit vibe. So I decided to scrap it and do everything again. This time, I'm starting with a rounder shape and slicing off one side with a wire to create a sharper edge. Then I'm adding cheeks and lips with small pieces of clay before cutting out the mouth. I'm going to make an open mouth this time, which I think is going to work better with the mechanics of the puppet later on. I'm much more satisfied with this version because it's giving me a slight uncanny valley feeling even without the eyes in place. Here are all 3 models in comparison, and I'm glad I redid the kiwi. I'm setting this one aside and making silicone molds of the remaining 2. The good thing about this DIY is that the back of the fruit doesn't have to be perfect because we never get to see it. I'm only going to mold 2/3 of the fruit, so it's easier to remove. This is my favorite method for molding large objects, which greatly minimizes the risk of air bubbles. I'm making a ball of putty big enough for the entire piece and holding it in one hand. Then I press the item sideways whilst applying pressure from all sides. Now I'm carefully transferring this onto a flat surface and making sure the mold can stand upright. The problem I have now is that the shape of the fruit makes it very hard to demold. I'm trying to wedge a spoon into the tiny gap, and this is destroying the polymer clay in the process. This is the first project I ever did where I had to break the model in order to get it out. I'm a bit sad about this, but as long as the molds turn out well, then that's all that matters. These clay models won't be needed for anything else after this. Now I'm mixing up a batch of regular tab of silicone. I want this to be relatively opaque so it can hide the mechanism for opening and closing the mouth. I'm having some problems with the color here because I'm trying to get a vibrant orange. I keep adding pigment, but I overestimated the amount of silicone that fits into the cup, so it's getting tricky to mix. I don't know it yet, but this is going to cause a lot of problems later on. The kiwi is a lot easier because it's smaller and I had a pigment that was virtually the same shade. So just a tiny bit of this gives the perfect color. 3 hours later and both of these have cured. Unfortunately, when demolding the orange, I can see that there was quite a lot of undissolved pigment that has settled to the bottom. This produces these tiny pockets of color which look messy and are impossible to remove. Just like the pineapple squishy, when I look at this, it simply doesn't remind me of a creepy AI fruit baby. These specks of color are too distracting and I can barely see the contours of the face. So I'm going to remake the orange using a thinner liquid silicone dye. This goes in a lot more smoothly and I'm hoping it's going to turn out well. In the meantime, I'm going to start painting details on the kiwi. I'm using acrylic paint, which does flake a bit after it's dry, but it gives me more control over the shading. I'm adding some dark green all around the mouth and blending it outwards. Then I'm adding a light yellowish green for the face. When painting this, I'm getting a unique insight on the sort of mistakes that AI makes. For instance, the entire nose, cheek, and mouth area is the same color as the pale yellow of the kiwi core. This is visually impossible if you actually carve a face out of a kiwi, but AI clearly doesn't understand the physics of fruit. Once the shading is done, I'm going to grab some needle felt eyes. I'm cutting off the stem to make some DIY flat back eyes and then gluing them into place with E6000. The final step is to make some brown flocking powder for the skin. I'm starting with watered down acrylic paint, but quickly realize that this isn't working. Instead of transferring color to the flocking powder, the paint is clumping together into these little fuzzy balls. I need a dry pigment, so I'm scraping off some soft pastel dust. I'm also adding less flocking powder this time and then shaking everything together vigorously. This worked pretty well and I'm going to apply the brown flocking around the outside of my kiwi. The orange is cured and I'm much happier with this result. You can see the difference here. The second one has a slight translucence that enhances the contours of the face. It looks shiny but squishy at the same time, which is a key feature of those AI baby fruits. I'm hollowing out the back so it's easier to access the lips. Then I'm cutting through the mouth to create an opening, and this is starting to look more like a puppet. Just like before, I'm making some flat back eyes and sticking them into place. To make the leaf, I'm just going to cut one off this bundle of fake flowers. I'm also using a small section of the stem and then sticking it into a hole at the top. Then I'm gluing the leaf at the perfect angle so it partially hides the back part of the orange. When you look at this from the front, I don't want anyone to spot that the orange is actually flat. As mentioned earlier, I'm hoping I can create a movable mouth, and I have a few things here to test out. I've got 2 different hair clips and some tweezers. This one is quite flimsy, but the metal parts are very thin and easily hidden. I'm pressing this into the mouth cavity of the kiwi and pretty amazed at how well it works. This is exactly what I'm looking for, so I'm not even going to bother trying the other clip. The best part is that I can operate the mouth with one hand, which is important because I need the other hand to feed the fruit. Now let's set up the final shot. I bought some fresh fruits which I'll cut into very small pieces. This is the perfect prop for a fake AI video because nothing beats the colors and vibrancy of real fruit. I'm making thin triangular slices that would be easy to slide into the mouth. Then I'm setting up my cutting board in the same way as the glass fruit video and adding a layer of water to create shine. This is a test shot to check positioning, and I'm going to cover the squishy with a generous layer of Vaseline. This creates that extra unnatural shininess which feels more AI generated. I'm zooming in very close so you can't see my hand moving the hair clip. This looks hilarious and genuinely the closest I've ever come to a handmade uncanny valley feeling. The squishy mouth works better than I expected because it can stretch a lot to accommodate the fruit. After putting it in, I can simply pull the whole piece out of the other side. Of course, this illusion is immediately broken when the orange tips over and you realize it's just a simple handmade object. Same for the kiwi. By zooming very close, I can hide the hair clip and produce a seriously creepy looking puppet. And this is all without any sound effects yet. So obviously, oranges and kiwis don't make much noise when you eat them. My plan for the ASMR is to use fruits that are much crunchier and juicier. I decided to go with an Asian pear, an apple, and some watermelon. Recording ASMR for this type of AI is much easier than the glass fruits because I can simply chew the food myself. However, I'm definitely not a fan of mukbang and I cannot stand the noise of people eating, so this is going to be a cringe-inducing challenge. The watermelon didn't work at all because it was too juicy and was going to ruin my microphone. The Asian pear was very good, but the crunching still sounds a bit dry. I want more of that disgusting squelching ASMR that mukbang videos always have. So I also recorded myself eating a tomato in the juiciest way possible and overlaid that under the Asian pear. This is the final result, so please enjoy. I'm really pleased about this video because both the visual and audio elements work so well together. These AI clips are often about subverting people's expectations for what's going to happen next, or having something familiar behave in an unfamiliar way. The same thing can easily be applied to handmade objects as well. A big thanks for all the suggestions under my last video, and I'm definitely going to work my way through the list. I'm Joanna, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!